After a disastrous loss of 7 warships and 2,000 sailors in just 5 days, the Admiralty had seen enough. Crete was lost. Admiral Cunningham stared at their decision. Cease all evacuation operations immediately. Thousands of Allied soldiers were left to be captured, or worse. Cunningham knew his entire career and reputation were on the line. But as he put it, he also knew, quote, "It takes 3 years to build a ship, 300 years to build a tradition." Luftwaffe or not, he was not leaving those men behind. On May 31st, 1941, HMS Phoebe received orders directly contradicted London. Turn back to Crete. They could only take 3,500 men. The beach at Sfakia held nearly 10,000, and all of them knew this was the last ship out of Crete. In 1940, HMS Phoebe emerged from the Fairfield shipyards in Govan, Scotland, her hull cutting through the Clyde's frigid waters. This Dido-class cruiser stretched 156 meters, longer than a football field. Her 15.4-meter beam slicing through waves at nearly 60 kilometers per hour. Built for speed and precision strikes rather than heavy armor, she carried the grace of a hunter rather than the bulk of a brawler. 8 133mm guns mounted in twin turrets bristled from her deck, designed to tear into anything crossing her path. 2 quadruple 40mm anti-aircraft guns and 6 533mm torpedo tubes completed her formidable arsenal. On September 30th, Phoebe joined the Royal Navy. Her initiation came in the Home Fleet, patrolling North Atlantic waters from the bleak fortress of Scapa Flow in the Orkney Islands. Training hammered the crew through gunnery exercises and torpedo drills, while shore leave was often sacrificed for desperate rest. The crew hardened against the constant threat of German raiders and U-boats lurking beneath the surface. For Vic Chanter, a young medical assistant on his first ship, it became a crash course in survival as he treated everything from seasickness to injury sustained in violent seas. The ship's small sickbay became their only lifeline, and stocking Eastman pills for seasickness turned into an obsession among the crew. Then April 1941 arrived, and orders ripped Phoebe from the frozen north, hurling her toward the Mediterranean through a grueling passage around Africa. They took a wide berth around the submarine-infested Strait of Pantelleria, past Gibraltar, Freetown, Durban, Mombasa, and Aden, before slicing through the Suez Canal into Alexandria. They were entering a theater already earning its grim nickname as, quote, the graveyard of British cruisers. By the time HMS Phoebe arrived in the Mediterranean, German and Italian forces were smashing through Greece, while the British army, already stretched by the fighting in North Africa, diverted precious forces to aid the Greeks. Rommel's Africa Corps had been gathering strength in the desert, preparing to strike the weakened Allied lines. It was then that Phoebe found herself immediately thrown into Operation Demon, the desperate evacuation of British and Empire troops from Greece. On April 27, 1941, alongside destroyers HMS Defender, HMS Hereward, and HMS Hero, Phoebe became the lifeline as they rescued every soul from the Dutch troop ship Costa Rica, all 2,600 soldiers and her entire crew. HMS Calcutta, another Dido-class cruiser like Phoebe, stood shoulder to shoulder with her sister ships, having led flotillas to snatch 960 troops from Nafplio, while her guns provided a desperate shield of anti-aircraft fire for convoys under constant German air attack. Phoebe then made 3 perilous night runs from the Greek mainland, ferrying troops from Kalamata on the southern coast, while her boats became shuttles, risking German proximity to bring exhausted, wounded soldiers aboard. In the sickbay, Vic Chanter witnessed the horrific cost of the operation as he treated men with terrible wounds, some barely able to crawl. Thousands of Allied troops, British, Australian, and New Zealanders, found themselves cornered after their exhausting retreat from mainland Greece. They were critically short on rations, with ammunition dwindling and morale frayed, but not yet broken. Many of the very troops Phoebe and Calcutta pulled from Greece were then deposited on the island of Crete. Then, the Germans unleashed a new horror across the island's strategic position, a massive airborne invasion with paratroopers descending from the sky. Hitler had committed everything to seizing this vital Mediterranean stepping stone, and the ferocity of the German advance pushed the defenders across the rugged terrain toward the island's southern coast. Major General E.C. Weston and his senior commanders including New Zealander Freyberg, faced an impossible choice as their forces collapsed under overwhelming pressure, outflanked and outgunned. Every passing hour brought the German juggernaut closer, tightening the noose around the remaining defenders. Further east on the island, the isolated garrisons at Retimo and Heraklion fought in complete separation from the main evacuation effort. Their Australian defenders at Retimo were running critically low on everything while remaining unaware of the desperate plan unfolding to the south. Cut off and abandoned, they faced inevitable capture as German forces closed in around their positions. The skies above Crete screamed Wichita dive bombers while machine gun fire raked across rocky slopes. Any escape would require separate planning and incredible luck, if it happened at all. And so, the main body of Allied forces began their agonizing withdrawal toward what they hoped would be their salvation at Sfakia. The evacuation order came down on May 29, 1941, when Major General Weston met with his shattered command to hammer out their plan. The remains of Crete Force would pull back under the cover of night. The 4th and 5th New Zealand Brigades would spearhead the agonizing withdrawal toward the beaches, while the 19th Australian Brigade and a Royal Marine Battalion followed in their wake. The men assumed the entire force might be lifted by the night of May 30th, but the Germans pressed forward. By afternoon, the 23rd Battalion of New Zealanders found themselves clinging to the northern entrance of the Eskifu Plain. There, German mountain troops hammered their positions with the crack of Mauser rifles echoing off craggy slopes. The New Zealanders dug in across the bottleneck road, and Lee Enfield rifles spat flame against the advancing Gebirgsjäger. German mountain troops, lean and experienced, stitched lines of dust across rocky ground with light machine guns as waves of attackers surged. Mortar shells shrieked through the air, tearing at the earth and throwing up geysers of rock and dirt. The Allied forces repelled attack after attack, their numbers dwindling as ammunition bled away with each passing hour. Finally, under their own covering fire, they executed a bitter withdrawal that left them staggering but cohesive, rejoining the 5th Brigade near Komitades, just 5 kilometers from Sfakia, while German forces maintained their predatory pursuit. Far to the east, a separate drama unfolded as the garrison in Heraklion attempted its own evacuation. A naval force of 2 cruisers and 6 destroyers surged from Egypt under darkness, among them HMS Calcutta, veteran of countless dangerous runs. They managed to pull nearly 4,000 British troops from German advances, cramming them onto every available space. Yet escape proved only a brief reprieve. The convoy became a sitting target when it was delayed by ship damage on the return voyage to Alexandria. German aircraft descended on the tightly packed vessels in a maelstrom of bombs and gunfire that sent many rescued troops to watery graves. Dawn on May 30th, 1941, brought no respite as German mountain troops pressed closer to Sfakia, following the New Zealand withdrawal throughout the night to seize the Eskifu Plain before battling within sight of Imbros, a mere 16 kilometers from the evacuation beaches. The Australian 27th Battalion stood as a thin line of defiance. They blocked the road, while the German commander sought to outflank them by funneling troops into 2 brutal ravines on either side of their position. In the Sfakiana ravine to the west, advancing Germans collided head-on with elements of the 20th Battalion, under Colonel Howard Kippenberger's fierce leadership. In response, the colonel dispatched one of his companies, including 2nd Lieutenant Charles Upham's platoon, to seize the high ground and seal off the ravine. Upham's exhausted men forced their way up the 183-meter hill west of the ravine, each step dragging under the weight of sickness and bruises. At the crest, he spread his platoon along the slope, rifles trained on the floor below. Then he pushed higher, Bren gun in hand, 2 riflemen at his side. He dropped low, finger resting lightly on the trigger, eyes fixed on the enemy creeping closer. Their shapes growing sharper with every cautious step. The air tightened as he held his breath, waiting for them to fully expose themselves. At 500 yards, the brand hammered, shredding their ranks and sending them into a frantic retreat. 2 hours after starting the climb, Upham's platoon was back, delivering their message. All 22 enemy soldiers had been neutralized. For this action, and earlier audacious efforts on Crete, Charles Upham would receive the Victoria Cross. Yet courage alone could not summon the ships needed to evacuate thousands of trapped men at Crete Force headquarters. Freyberg and his commanders faced an agonizing calculation of human lives, as each of the 4 destroyers expected after dark could take only 500 men. The 4th and 5th Brigades were selected to go. However, insufficient capacity meant not all of the 5th Brigade could be accommodated, forcing Brigadier James Hargest to make the crushing choice that the 21st Battalion would stay behind. The 18th Battalion, meanwhile, was tasked with forming an armed perimeter around the beach. Then, more devastating news arrived from Alexandria. The evacuation was being scaled back further, to only 250 men per destroyer due to air attack risks on crowded vessels. To the troops of the 5th Brigade, it meant enduring another hellish night on Crete. To make matters worse, only 2 destroyers arrived due to mechanical failures and bomb damage. Still, 1,400 men were hauled aboard that night as the entire 4th Brigade squeezed past the armed cordon, while men who had lost their units begged, creating a scene that left Colonel Kippenberger feeling, quote, bitterly ashamed. As night deepened, Sunderland flying boats spirited Freyberg and other senior staff away, leaving thousands behind to face the sound of German engines growing closer with each passing hour. Sunrise on May 31st broke over Spakia to reveal 9,000 Allied soldiers huddled in and around the village, their hopes clinging to the faint promise of escape. In Alexandria, General Wavell faced the agonizing truth that naval losses were mounting, with ships battered, sunk, and crippled by non-stop German air attacks. This somber fact forced him to make the critical decision that this night's evacuation would be the absolute last. 4 destroyers were initially allocated as a meager lifeline for so many souls. But then, a desperate voice from across the Mediterranean would not let it end there. In Alexandria, New Zealand Prime Minister Peter Fraser, learning that May 31st was to be the final night, felt his resolve ignite at the thought of thousands of his nation's soldiers left to face capture, a crushing blow to New Zealand's war effort that he would not accept. Fraser marched straight to Admiral Sir Andrew Cunningham, Commander-in-Chief of the Mediterranean Fleet. He didn't just appeal to the Admiral, but pressed and argued and effectively demanded that more be done for his trapped countrymen. Cunningham faced an impossible dilemma, as the Admiralty in London had issued explicit orders to cease rescue operations due to unsustainable losses. But Fraser's impassioned plea cut through the weariness and strategic calculations. The Admiralty had already lost ships, but he would not lose his honor or abandon the men still fighting, famously declaring, quote, "It takes 3 years to build a ship, 300 years to build a tradition." Against all reasonable odds and direct orders, Cunningham issued the command that HMS Phoebe, a vessel already scarred by war, would turn back to Crete. It was a last-ditch mission, with the crew stretched thin and survival odds slim. Darkness embraced Crete as HMS Phoebe knifed through waves on her desperate return journey to Sfakia. The captain, Guy Grantham, addressed the ship's company over the public address system with his grim forecast about their mission to evacuate what remained of the army from Greece and now Crete, notably calling their odds of success, quote, discouraging. Every sailor understood this was a one-way trip for many. They would be defying the Luftwaffe and enemy fleet for stranded men, a risk of the highest order. As ships ghosted into Sfakia Bay under deep night, moving without navigation lights and guided only by Lieutenant Lumsden's masterful maneuvering, the scene on the beach revealed controlled pandemonium. Thousands of men, with faces etched by exhaustion and despair, surged toward shore. Word had spread like wildfire that this was the last night, with room for an estimated 3,500 men, a fraction of those still trapped. Priority went to infantry units that had borne the brunt of the German assault: the 5th Brigade, 19th Brigade, and the British Royal Marine Battalion. To prevent a frantic rush that could have doomed the entire operation, commanders made the difficult decision to establish another armed cordon. They formed a picket line. It held back remnants as Colonel Howard Kippenberger led his 20th Battalion to the beach, passing men who pleaded or stared blankly. Kippenberger later recalled the orders to fire upon any man who tried to break in. Nearly 4,000 troops, including 80 walking wounded, were somehow squeezed onto the vessels, their decks becoming a living carpet of humanity as men clambered aboard Phoebe, with waves of mixed emotions washing over them. Relief surged through those escaping the island's clutches. but it was tempered by profound regret for thousands of comrades left behind to face inevitable capture, while Phoebe's crew, including Vic Chanter, watched the endless stream of weary faces. On the heaving decks, men stood shoulder to shoulder, their weight pressing the ships low in the water. Out beyond the surf, the overloaded silhouettes rocked like slow, fat prizes in the dark Mediterranean, perfect marks for the Stukas and submarines already hunting these waters. As the last exhausted soldiers packed onto their decks, HMS Phoebe and HMS Abdiel cut away from Crete under deepest pre-dawn darkness, loaded with thousands of men as they began their perilous dash across the Mediterranean. Every knot of speed became a dice throw against inevitable sunrise, while officers on the bridge strained their eyes against the black. Dawn broke, revealing the convoy, a small shape scattered on the vast sea. Almost immediately, Junkers 88s and Stuka dive bombers appeared, engines roaring as they dove sharply toward the ships, filling the sky with planes streaking downward in coordinated attack runs. Vic Chanter would remember the blue sky turning black with gunfire bursts and bombs plunging toward the water. Ships twisted and turned in frantic evasive maneuvers as the Stuka peeled away, diving steeply toward Phoebe's stern, while Captain Grantham barked orders and the helm spun, sending the massive ship heeling hard to starboard. Waterspouts erupted around them as bombs slammed into the sea. Men were forced to cling to anything solid to avoid being flung across decks, while the ship shuddered and groaned against the strain. The naval crews maintained a furious pace despite exhaustion. Their anti-aircraft guns barked defiance, while captains threw ships into dizzying turns to avoid direct hits, becoming a scattered but still moving armada that continued fighting against overwhelming odds. Back in Alexandria, a silent, nerve-wracking vigil unfolded as New Zealand Prime Minister Peter Fraser and Admiral Cunningham stood on the dock in pre-dawn gloom. They stood, scanning the horizon and willing HMS Phoebe and other vessels to materialize in their midnight gamble. Finally, after a long voyage under constant threat, the convoy limped into Alexandria. Relief washed over both crammed soldiers and battle-weary sailors as thousands of troops who had fought for days with little food or rest finally collapsed onto solid ground. Phoebe's crew had barely slept, maybe 15 or 20 hours over 4 grueling days. Still, they found brief relief in safely delivering their human cargo out of Crete's grasp. And for those left behind after Crete's evacuation, roughly 5,000 troops faced grim choices. Most surrendered and spent years in harsh POW camps across Europe. Others fled into the mountains with local help, joining the resistance or escaping by sea, while civilians aiding them risked brutal German reprisals. Regardless, HMS Phoebe's successful return with 3,700 soldiers vindicated Admiral Cunningham's defiance of direct orders, though the Mediterranean's toll continued to grow. On June 1, 1941, HMS Calcutta steamed back toward Alexandria after successfully evacuating nearly 4,000 troops from Heraklion. About 100 nautical miles from safety, her C-class hull cut through Mediterranean swells. Suddenly, the horizon erupted with the drone of German Junkers Ju-88 aircraft. The Luftwaffe pilots dove through scattered clouds, their twin-engine bombers screaming toward the converted anti-aircraft cruiser as her guns swiveled skyward, spitting tracer rounds into the blue expanse above the sea. 2 bombs found their mark. The first explosion tore through her forward sections, while the second struck amidships, ripping massive holes in her hull that sent torrents of seawater cascading into her compartments. Calcutta's veteran crew fought the flooding, but it wasn't enough. The Mediterranean claimed another victim as the cruiser rolled to starboard, her superstructure disappearing beneath the waves, while HMS Coventry raced to the rescue of her sailors. The final toll carved itself into naval records. 2 officers and 116 ratings lost beneath the waves, while 23 officers and 232 enlisted men were pulled from the water. Their survival was only a small mercy in the face of catastrophic loss. Her sinking was a stark reminder that even success came at a terrible cost. The veteran cruiser's loss helped seal the Admiralty's decision to end further evacuations from the island. The final tally stood at 16,500 to 18,000 evacuated from Crete and up to 50,000 from Greece. But victory came at a brutal price. The graveyard of British cruisers claimed 7 warships and merchant ships, along with 2,000 seamen. Despite the cost, profound gratitude emerged. The New Zealand Army hosted a large party in Alexandria, a tribute held on HMS Phoebe. Admiral Cunningham flew his flag from her mast, a powerful symbol of unbreakable bonds. A large New Zealand Army delegation presented a huge fund for the families of lost Royal Navy men. Their speech resonated, quote, "We in the Army didn't worry much while we were retreating to the beaches. We knew the Navy would be there, and our hopes and wishes came true." This simple phrase echoed countless lives pulled from the brink. For HMS Phoebe, little respite followed Crete. She plunged back into the Mediterranean's grind, joining the Tobruk ferry, escorting supply ships along the Libyan coast. On August 27, 1941, an Italian torpedo bomber struck with brutal force. A massive 18-meter hole was torn in her hull below the bridge, stretching to the keel, large enough to drive a double-decker bus through. Yet Phoebe refused to surrender. Her watertight compartments held. Frantic damage control by her crew jettisoned 3 torpedoes, an anchor, and a motorboat. She limped back to Alexandria for temporary repairs, then embarked on a harrowing 19,000-kilometer voyage to New York for complete restoration. Years after the war ended, she'd be broken up for scrap in 1956. Admiral Andrew Cunningham's legendary career, marked by leading major Allied naval operations and ascending to First Sea Lord, might never have been had he not defied orders to save his men during the harrowing Crete evacuation.